for their. I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Jillian Barnas. Many of you actually know. Jillian received her PhD, and her dissertation focused on the influence of physical activity intervention, sedentary activity, social skill development, and problem behavior in elementary age children. She also has an MS and a BS in exercise physiology from Illinois State. What you may not know is after her doctorate, Jillian was the Human Services Public Safety and Corrections Policy Fellow with the Most Policy Initiative, which I'm not sure about what that is. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit that stands for the Missouri Science and Technology Fellowship is the core program there. And she continued to teach for us here at Mizzou. So just so you know, we all know that Jill's is a very hard worker. So part of that job is writing science notes, which I'm probably going to talk about that. But so that you know, in the short 2 years that you were there, she wrote 43 science notes, 37 were solo authored. So wrote a lot, continued to be as diligent there as here. Did I mention she was still teaching at the time? So there is still that. Now as a AAAS fellow, so that's the American Association for Science at the National Institute of Justice. She's interested in the intersection of health and wellness in the criminal justice system, specifically is using her skill set to help bridge the gap between academia, practitioners, and policy to assist in evidence-based decision. Also for fun, being in DC, activities with Olive, and continuing as a CrossFit athlete. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you back. Please join me in helping.
I don't know why I was about to start applauding for myself. Like, oh my God, because I'm so used to being in there. And it honestly is so weird being over here. But I've had a wonderful time here. It's weird, again, so weird being on this side of the aisle, but I got the awesome NEP red carpet treatment today, and now I know what that feels like, and it was amazing. I had a great time with the graduate students at lunch. I hope you guys feel the same way. But anyway, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the intersection of science and policy. But before I really get into that, I just want to put out a little disclaimer. Uh-oh. Oh, you told me that, and wait, there is no okay. Oh, okay. Disclaimer, these are my views and my opinions. This is not reflective of AAAS, and it's not reflective of the National Institute of Justice. So you're just getting just me and my personality today. So the role of the objective of this talk is really to talk about the role of science and scientists in policy, but also the best way that I'm going to be able to do that is talking about my experiences in policy in the government ecosystem. So the connection of science and policy, we're literally just going to jump right into it, is really twofold, right? You have policy for science, which is really about decisions about how to fund and structure science. This can also relate to like the ethical guidelines of science, like IRBs and things of that nature, or promoting the public engagement with science. And then you also have science for policy. And this is the use of knowledge to facilitate or improve decision-making, which kind of involves providing information, evidence-based advice to policymakers that really assess the risks and benefits of different policy options, or you're evaluating the impacts and outcomes of policy interventions. So the idealist roles of science and society, there's really 4 categories that you can fall into. We're going to start down here, which is a pure scientist. This person is really just interested in just the facts, and they're not really going to care about what the policy decision is focusing on. The science arbiter is really going to focus on questions or information that policymaker might be interested in. But again, they're not solely focused on the decision making or what the policy implications are going to be. The issue advocate, this person is out there to try to reduce the amount of choices that a policymaker might have. So this is where your, again, like advocacy groups are going to come in and they'll be like, we need to help greenhouse gas emissions or whatever the hot topic we want to make it to be. And they're going to be like, this is the way that we're going to do that, and there's no other option. So we're really advocating for one side or the other. And then there's the last one is the honest broker of policy alternatives. This is the person who actually expands the amount of choices that a policymaker might have. So they're going to say you have these options, but you also have these options that you probably didn't consider. And again, the choice is ultimately up to you, but they're trying to expand the choices so that that person has to reduce down to that best possible choice that they feel will be best for their constituents. So science policy kind of sounds sexy, am I right? But to clarify here, my role here in science policy, I don't go running into Congress and I go like, stop the vote, like we cannot vote on this, like we've got to talk about this. My role is very like subdued. I'm not in their face, I'm not anything like that. I'm just literally providing information, allowing that person to make a decision and move on from there. So science and technology is really influenced by a wide variety of different outlets. There's no one entity that dictates science and technology policy. There's an influence from a lot of different areas that includes federal agencies, that includes advocacy groups, colleges and universities, the public, the press. There's just so many different avenues. And over here, I have just a list of just the research and development opportunities that are, this isn't inclusive, but just some of them to just indicate there's so many different things going on at the federal level of government and in government in general that my experiences of like alone are just a small little facet of what is actually like working for the government. So basically from here on out, the conversation is really going to just revolve around my experiences, how I got to where I got to, and hopefully we can have an open discussion about some of your interests and things of that nature. So how did I get here? Wrong button. So to understand how I got to this position, we need to understand where I came from. So many of you are familiar with the game of life, right? And in the game of life, you start college. I'm not going to bore you with my childhood or anything like that, but you start college, right? And you're going along, and when you get to the end, you always get to the stop sign that comes to a job search. Most people will continue and actually go on and find a job. Me, I made the same decision to constantly start over. And not only did I do that once, I did that twice, okay? And why did I do that given the amount of content out there that suggests that I shouldn't do so? So I went to Illinois State University. My major was in exercise science. I had a minor in psychology. And my initial thoughts were, I'm going to go to physical therapy school. I thought that was going to be the ultimate dream for me. Got to Illinois State, told them that, and they were like, you're going to have to do a lot of chemistry classes. And I said, no, I'm not. I will not do chemistry. And also, I don't look good in khakis and polos. And so I was like, I should probably rethink this whole idea of PT school. But we had a really awesome course in my undergrad that was Intro to Exercise Science, and it talked about careers. Dan Smith, you teach a similar class to that, as you know. But we had someone come in and talk about the different facets of exercise science, and someone talked about working with NASA and astronauts, and I was like, okay, that sounds pretty cool. So I made a decision after that that I knew that I was going to have to at least get a master's degree, but honestly, we were just leaving it at a master's degree. PhD, never once in sight. So during my time at undergrad, I conducted a lot of undergraduate research. I did an internship in the ISU exercise physiology lab. They had a community service program, so I was taking a lot of those, like doing the bod pod and running, we called it fuel testing, metabolic fuel testing on people in the community. And we were sitting down with them and talking about like their numbers and their reports and how they can improve their life. And I was like, this is really cool. But at the end of my undergrad, we had to do an internship, and I was like, maybe I'll like explore cardiac rehab. Like that sounds interesting. But with cardiac rehab, as great as it was, I just realized I didn't want to fix something that was already broken. I wanted to prevent these things from happening. So it didn't really make sense for me to be in cardiac rehab anymore or pursue that long term. So these were my advisors over here. That's Dr. Brown up top, Dr. Dodd at the bottom. And they were like, you should really consider just staying on and get your master's. And, you know, as you were kind of planning, maybe you could go work for NASA, maybe do something else. I don't know. But we decided that I would stay. And so I did an assistantship with them in the exercise physiology lab. I taught freshman level courses. So I started TAing 10 years ago, basically. I got involved with the Illinois Enhancing PE Task Force. So some of you kind of heard me talk about this in another meeting. But basically, this was kind of like my first dabble into the connection of science and policy. was that in Illinois, they were thinking about getting rid of PE during the school day because they thought that it was causing too much distraction, et cetera, et cetera. And so we would go down to the Capitol and we would advocate and be like, no, you need to keep PE in. Why? Because there's a childhood obesity epidemic. It can be different, right? We can teach them about how to actually take care of themselves instead of learning to kick a kickball from kindergarten through 12. Like, we can make PE a little bit better, a little bit more proactive instead of just learning an activity. And so that was kind of my first dabble there. I did a lot of work with like polar heart rate technologies, and I actually started employment with a company called Health Solutions at the time. This was like as needed, PRN, little pocket cash, if you will. But I started working for corporate wellness, where we would go to different companies and we would do like BMI. They would do their little blood sugar, we do their blood pressure, take their height and weight, and we're like, you're healthy. That's really cool. I was like, okay, this is really not for me. Like, I'm doing a lot of way cooler stuff than taking someone's height and weight and telling them that their BMI is bad. So when it came down to it, I honestly did not know what I wanted to do at the end of my graduate career at Illinois State. So I tried to give myself as many backup plans as possible. Like I said, I was employed by Health Solutions. I was considering some other really cool positions. Like, there was a military research assistant position at Pittsburgh, which I was kind of like, that sounds cool, but I think I'm going to pass this opportunity off to somebody else. And I put a little star next to it because this person has had an amazing career. They went from the military research assistant to working with Fitbit, and now they're actually like doing Gatorade or research with Gatorade, kind of like the pinnacle. Like, what do you want to do with your exercise physiology career? They're actually doing like the exercise testing for like athletes and things of that nature. And I'm like, that was cool. That could have been me, but it's not. So I also did a lot of work with polar heart rate technologies. Like I said, they had a Midwestern sales position open, and I was like, do I really fit the criteria for like a salesperson? Probably not. And then I also considered opening a business, which wasn't really for me either. So my professors were basically like, why don't you consider a PhD? And I laughed. I was like, oh my God, no way. But I was like, whatever. I will literally reach out to one person who just so happened to be at the University of Missouri, and I'll just see what happens, right? So basically, I reached out to Dr. Ball. I was like, hey, you do kid research. I think that's cool. I like kids. You got like a grad student opening? And he was like, come on, check us out. Like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I came down, did the whole grad day. And my brother was also applying for PhD programs at the time, but he wasn't successful the first time he applied. So I was like, I won't be successful the first time I apply. There's no way. But then lo and behold, I got my little letter. You want to TA and make some money too? And I was like, well, let's just do it. Let's just dabble, see how it goes. So August 2014, came down here to the University of Missouri. I was advised by Dr. Steve Ball, who I don't think is in NEP anymore. And then I was also advised by Dr. Jill Canale. And so my timeline at Mizzou, I did a lot of stuff. I was here for a while. But there were two defining moments that I really want to talk about. And it is the one with the Root NEP seminar speaker. And then the second one is a really awesome workshop opportunity that I had a chance to go to. So the one with the Root seminar speaker, I don't know if you're catching on my Friends reference here, but that's okay. This is me, all happy as can be in my second year. And I'm so happy because I just heard from Dr. Canale about her Jefferson policy, the AAAS Jefferson fellowship experience, sorry. And I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. And so we were going to, I also wanted to quit at this time as well. So I had a little beacon of light started to shine through. I was like, okay, hold on. Don't be rash. Like, let's think about this. What is this science policy thing? So I leave her office, all happy as can be, and I go to the NEP seminar lunch in what used to be, well, they were used to in 327. So I go down to 327. It's this guy, I think he was from Oregon State. I won't call his name out because I did Google him. I was like, I won't do that. But anyway, go down, or go up actually, to the lunch. I'm super excited. And we go around the room. What's your name? What are you doing? What research do you do? And what do you want to do with your career? What do you want to do with your PhD? I'm like, I got this. I finally have like a good answer. So we get to me, and I'm like, hi, I'm Jill. I do physical activity in kids, and for a career, I think I want to go into science policy. And he like got the attention of the whole room and was like, hold on, listen, there are only two jobs that you can have. That is academia and industry. Science policy does not exist. And I was like, well, okay. And he was like, oh, wait, there's one more. You can go back to law school and become a patent lawyer. And I was like, all right, like this isn't Legally Blonde here. No freaking way. So I packed up my lunch because we had box lunches at the time. I literally packed up my lunch and I walked out. And I was like, fuck this. You know what I mean? I was like, this is ridiculous. I cannot believe this. I'm in my second year of this crap. Just layers upon layers of crap of just, it sucks, right? You're like, what am I doing this for? Like, this is so stupid, right? So, you know, and then on top of that, right, you have failed projects, okay? Projects that are taking way too long that were supposed to be your dissertation that are now not going to be your dissertation. So what do? Do you quit? Do you stay? And for me, like I had a master's degree. I could fall back on that, right? But what do I have to show for like the 4 years of work that I've already done? I'm like, that is so just disappointing and disheartening, and I'm not going to quit. So Dr. Canali, yet again, comes in, saves the day for me, because apparently that's what she was doing all the time. But she sent me this opportunity to attend the AAAS Catalyzing Advocacy in Science and Engineering workshop. And she's like, this could be really cool. Just apply and see what happens. And I'm like, okay. So I do like my best Leslie Knope impression in my like letter. And I'm like, oh yeah, like we need to connect science and policy for like the good of society and the American people. And I'm like, as I'm typing this, I'm like, this is ridiculous, but whatever. But it really gave me this like really quick snapshot of what I could potentially be doing. And I was friggin' hooked. So we go there, you know, we get a speaker from like the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We hear all about like the federal budget process. We learn like the nitty gritty ways and not the schoolhouse rock way of how a bill becomes a law. And we learn about like, how does science interact with the legislature? How does it work with the executive branch and even the judicial branch? And you're just like, whoa, this is seriously so cool. We're in the heart of DC running around. I was like, all right, we're really, truly onto something here. So of course, because things cannot just go swimmingly when you're in grad school, the pandemic happens, okay? World, chaos, whatever. I was kind of at this complete loss as to like what I was gonna do. I was just trying to finish my dissertation. And yeah, it was just a low time, right? You're like, are these fellowships even happening? Like nobody really knew. And Canali's like, you're gonna have to do an academic postdoc. And I was like, maybe, but let's just like hold out and just see what's gonna happen. So of course I was like, all right, here's some people that I would potentially be interested in, but there's this new science policy group through Missouri that's just starting and they're looking for their first year fellows. And I was like, well, how could that timing possibly have worked out? So I applied and the rest is, no, it's not history, but like I got it, right? So now we can kind of get into these two different experiences that I've had. I've worked with Most Policy Initiative, and now I've worked with AAAS at the National Institute of Justice. And these are two varying experiences. They are really not the same at all. So with Most, my title, very long, Human Services, Public Safety, and Corrections Policy Fellow. It's a mouthful. But what made this one so different from AAAS, this was a state level policy fellowship. I got to work with the legislature, and really, what we did is we wrote science notes and we were there for informational purposes, which I'll explain in a little bit. But the interesting thing was that I wasn't really hired for my specific scientific expertise. I was actually hired for being more of a generalist. And what was really valued at that time was my skill set. So like the ability to read and break down research in a way that makes sense, the ability to identify good, rigorous research for that matter. Do you know what I mean? So it was really that skill set that made me important, not so much like, okay, yeah, you know exercise physiology, but let's be honest, there's not a lot of bills coming down the pipeline that are exercise physiology related. So what are you doing? Then with AAAS, this is a little bit different, right? Federal level, executive branch fellow, so not working so closely with the legislature. This is a federal agency that conducts or sponsors research. So the best way to describe the National Institute of Justice is that it's like the National Institute of Health, right? They are steering the research for the rowers to conduct the research. That's the NIJ, just with a criminal justice lens. And so with NIJ, I was mostly sought out for my actual scientific expertise and not so much being a generalist because I was going to fill a specific niche. So with most policy initiative, their mission statement is to promote long-term health, sustainability, economic growth for people and communities by connecting science and policy at the local and state level. And so in this first fellowship, they were hiring just 5 fellows, and the fellows are listed over here. So they're really spanning a wide range of topics, right? You have your agriculture, your natural conservation, education, workforce development, health and mental health, human service, public safety and corrections, and you have energy, the environment, utilities, and transportation. So they're trying to cover the whole range of what potential bill topics would come down the legislature. So my responsibilities were essentially to be Google for the Missouri State Legislature. So a representative would come up to me and they'd be like, hey, Jill, we're really interested in setting up a correctional nursery program. What do you know? Okay. So I'd go back to the office, I'd sit down on my computer and I would start doing research to figure out like, okay, what are the correctional nursery programs? Do we even have one in the state of Missouri? Do other states have them in the state, like in their state? What's the positive impacts that come from this? How does this help with recidivism? How does this help with maternal postpartum depression? How does this help with child development? And so basically what we're doing is we're putting out these science notes that show what we know, what we don't know, and what other states are doing, and only from an informational point of view. So I'm not sitting there and being like, yes, we should do this because X, Y, and Z, and here are all the benefits. I'm saying, here are all the options that we have, what we know, what we don't know, what other states are doing. Now you make the decision. I've provided you all this information. It's on you to come up with what we do. And then in addition to that, we would also do informational testimony. So if you've ever listened in on like a committee hearing about a bill, they'll have people who will testify in favor, against it, or for informational purposes. So we would come in at the end, because that's where they put the informational people, was at the end, and we would list out all the research and all the things like that in a 5-minute spiel, and it would just go on the bill record and just be testimony. But it was never for or against a specific bill. So Missouri is not the only state with a fellowship program. They're actually starting to pop up all over the place because the government, state level government, is actually starting to realize the importance of like nonpartisan informational purposes in the realm of evidence-based decision making. And so they have all these fellowship programs that are in California, Idaho, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and Connecticut. They're also popping up in Illinois and Ohio. But what is important to know is that, again, with this whole realm, this broad realm of science policy, all these programs are different. So like me, I was more of like a science advisor, right? I was in like this Google position for the legislature. There's some positions where you get placed in someone's office. So you might just be working on science policy related issues for that representative or that senator. There's some that get placed at the executive level in an office just doing data related issues. So all these programs operate differently. So no science policy program is really the same. But now that we've talked about most policy initiative, we can kind of go into AAAS and National Institute of Justice. So the National Institute of Justice, as I said, is very similar to the NIH. Again, just trying to promote, conduct good research, good sound research that's going to impact the practitioners. It's going to set up the landscape for future research, et cetera. Again, they're kind of like the steerers in the ship, with the rowers being the academics and people who are going to do the research. So a lot of people, when I talk about National Institute of Justice, they're like, what the heck is the National Institute of Justice? Like, are you an Avenger? Like, what are you? It doesn't really make any sense to me. So the best way that I can explain it is like, NIH is so big. It is so vast, right? They have so many different agencies and divisions within NIH. NIJ is very, very tiny. It's within the office, and this is a very bad quality little diagram here, but they're within this little office over here, the Office of Justice Programs. And within that, you have the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Justice Statistics, we have juvenile delinquency and prevention, victims of crime, etc. And so this is literally like the NIH equivalent for the criminal justice realm. So it's a little small office. It's about 60 people that work there. And they cover, like, they put out solicitations. So for like policing, domestic radicalization and extremist content like terrorism, corrections and reentry, forensics, school safety, courts, drugs and crime. They do a lot of different things. But within that, they also do like intramural research. They also respond to congressional directives. So they do a lot. Whereas like NIH, you have like your research arm, and then you kind of have that grants and other side of the policy side of things. They're two totally separate entities. Whereas NIJ, everyone kind of contributes to the whole gambit of things. And so my responsibilities with NIJ are really kind of threefold. I had to sit down and break this down in a way that made logical sense to me, because I was like, I actually do quite a lot of stuff. So how can I group this into like 3 buckets or 3 distinctive categories? And so first, one of my responsibilities over there is grant review. So we put out grant solicitations, they go on the street, people apply, and then what we have to do is, we do like an internal review of applications so that we understand what is being submitted. We have collaboration calls where we sit down with the grant reviewers and they kind of go back and forth of why they scored things one way versus another way, and like what should be funded and not funded, et cetera, et cetera. And then we sit down and we work on the funding recommendation memo, which then gets presented to like the higher ups of the office. The other thing that I do is I'm more so of like a technical subject matter expert. So I cover a lot of health and wellness issues. So one of the programs that we have at NIJ is called the LEADS program. And basically this program is officers who are very interested in conducting research within their own agencies to improve their policing agency. And so a lot of that, a lot of the conversations in regards to modernizing the policing profession does revolve around health and wellness issues. How are we keeping our officers 5 times more likely to die than just like the general population? Like they're inflicted with so many things, incidences of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. So I kind of serve as like an expert in that regard. So when someone's like, hey, I'm really interested in maybe implementing a mental health app, and I'll sit down with them and we'll look through things and we'll kind of talk about it together and try to see like, is it worthwhile? Like, are there other things we should consider? How can we come up with a little study that they can do, or how can they implement this in their department, or et cetera. I also get to review and evaluate reports and congressional directives. So some of the things that NIJ is tasked with is like looking at Deaths in Custody Reporting Act, right? So they put out this huge report and it's got a lot of health information about why are these people dying in prison and why are they dying in jail custody. And I just kind of comb through it and make sure that there's no really like lingering questions, or did they consider looking at this perspective of why these women died in prison while they're pregnant or something like that. And then the other thing that we get to do is submit program requests for the upcoming year. I can't talk about too many things because I'm not allowed to, so I can only really leave that one at that. And then in the other bucket, we have intramural research and deliverables. So this is the stuff that I do get a little excited about it because I still get to conduct research in a smaller capacity. So I'm working with the 30 by 30 initiative, which is the goal is to get the police force to be 30% women by 2030. And one of the things that we're looking at is the physical ability testing, because that is one of the biggest barriers to recruitment and retention for women. And so we're putting out a policy brief on that. And then in relation to that as well, I'm working on another study looking at, again, the physical ability testing, but as it relates to officer job performance. So we're looking at their data to see how well are we hiring like a good officer versus a bad officer. Looking at like use of force, citations, are they pulling out their gun? Are they not pulling out their gun? What is this test that's been such a barrier to recruitment? How is that actually predicting a good police officer versus a bad police officer? So that's been really exciting to work on. And then lastly, one of the things that I get to, it's not one of the things I get to do, but like I'm actually evaluating their safety, health, and wellness portfolio to look at what they've done in the last 20 years and just see if there's any major gaps that we haven't quite addressed, and how maybe that may be a future potential research solicitation that comes on down the road. So from this, as you can see, the experiences have been really different. They're not the same. They're definitely distinctive in their own way. And so, like I said, this is really just a small window into potentially another opportunity for you to consider. I can honestly say after 3 years, I absolutely love what I do. So when I was talking about some of those lows, and I was talking about like project stalling or like the NEP the rude seminar speaker, I mean, at the end of the day, it was worth it. I mean, if I would have quit 4 years in, I could not do any of the things that I'm doing now. So if you are spinning your wheels and you're like, screw this, I'm out, whatever, I'm gonna just tell you, just hold on, because I was probably the biggest like person walking around NEP, just like, I'm gonna quit. This is dumb. Like, I was definitely that person, but like if I did, there's no way that I would have ever came anywhere close to being able to do some of this really cool stuff. And I just love the fact that I get to use my skill set to literally have somewhat of an impact, right? I did not want to just keep publishing research to go unread, unused by anybody, and kind of going into this like black space of like, oh, it's behind a paywall and like who's going to access it. I really wanted to just start taking all the good research that everyone does and being like, hey, here's some really important information that might impact the policy that you're trying to do, or some considerations that you need to have for this policy. And so really just trying to bridge that gap between academia and policy. But even more so too, is that with NIJ, I actually get to do a lot of work with law enforcement. So not only are we talking between academia and policy, but also academia and the practitioner space. So it kind of goes full circle. And it's really awesome. I love it. You guys should consider it. But I'm not allowed to sway you from academia. So just so you know. That's a really short presentation because I was keeping it casual, because I wanted to open up some questions from you guys, because I know that this is not something that's super common. Not many people come through and they're like, hi, yes, I work with AAAS. Like, what do you want to know? So I really wanted to open up, have a conversation, see what you guys think, what the questions are, because I'm here for you guys. So with that, thanks for your time.
Presentation. What type of grants do you review? Is it the applications for NIJ related intramural research?
Oh yeah, so the question was, what type of applications do I review? So NIJ puts out grant solicitations. So the gambit could be policing, and there's specific questions within policing, or a general topic within policing that they're trying to understand. It just depends on the fiscal year for them and what they have the funds for what they want to fund. But then it also comes down to the director priorities as well. So like, for example, one of the bigger priorities in previous administrations was really focusing on drugs and crime. And so there's always a big pool of money going for drugs and crime research, but they're actually pulling away from that, and they're moving more into like community trust, understanding community violence, more implementation research, how to modernize the policing profession, health and wellness type things like that.
People from outside the NIJ applying.
Yeah, so these are academic researchers and think tanks. Some think tanks will apply for various research grants. Oh, Brian?
I guess I had a grad student when I was in a colleague when I was in grad school, and we studied fiber. And she said, I don't want to be the fiber person. So I guess I'm thinking, what I'm hearing you say is there's something you've learned in your PhD that is really why you did the PhD, not to be an expert on child physical activity, whatever. Can you tell me what skill set you got by hanging in that you used in these big picture?
Honestly, the skill set that I got for hanging in was resiliency and autonomy, and just being able to make the best of a bad situation, right? If you're not resilient, you're not gonna fare well. And that goes with a lot of different things too. I mean, I can go down a rabbit hole of advice of how to navigate your PhD, but like Dana and I were talking about one of them last night, and that was your relationships, whether that's social or romantic. If the people in your life are not supporting you, if they're not going to support your future goals, you might need to reevaluate that if that's not aligning with like what you want to do. And it sounds weird. You don't want to cut people out because they're, and I'm not saying you should cut people out, let me just clarify that, but like you don't want to like step away from people just because like they don't like see your future.
I was thinking, people think that we're training students to be academics, and I always maintain that we're using the academic environment to train people to go and do what they want to do. And so to me, were you as good of a speaker before grad school? Were you as good of a writer? How did the skills that were graduated?
Yeah.
How are you use them in the fellowship?
I mean, my ability to read and understand research, I mean, I would not have gotten that experience if I did not go to grad school. So really being able to just break down something in a communicative way in layman's terms is actually really hard to do. I mean, if you take your own research and try to explain it to somebody else and they're just looking at you with this like deer in the headlights look, like, you're not doing a good job at it. You're just putting in a lot of jargon that doesn't make any sense to anybody.
Communication.
So yeah, communication skills, definitely important. Yeah.
One grad student told me a couple of years ago, I don't know everything, but I know I can figure it out.
Yes, there's actually
Yeah.
yes, there's actually great power in just saying you don't know something, but that you will look it up and get back to them later. Especially when I was working with Mo's, someone asked me a question once. They're like, "Do you know what the personal property tax law is for Illinois?" And I was like, "No." Do I look like a tax economist person? No. But I went and I figured it out and I reported back to them and they honestly came to me with more tax questions, but I was like, crap. But I at least became like a trusted person. I mean, my tax policy hat, I joke, is like that colorful one with the little propeller on top. I gave you very basic tax information, but that's about it. Like I can't go much further than that. But yeah.
So the ability, if you don't know it, how to figure it out fast.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I know, but where do you see yourself segueing into? Do you want to go at the state level, actually, at the federal level?
So I loved my experience with most, and I think that's where I felt like I had the most impact, if you will. Just because a lot of the issues I worked on were very social related and very hot topic related issues. And I actually felt like I was able to contribute in quite, not like a super impactful way. It's not like they were like, oh my God, Jill said this in her science note, so we need to make sure that this is in our bill. No, I felt like I almost grounded what they were doing and it just helped them make sense of what they were doing and that they could also see that there was a bigger picture to what they were doing. Like for the correctional nursery program, they didn't realize all these additional implications and positive things that would come out from potentially having something like that. So if you can generate that knowledge and put it in a way that's like digestible, there's a lot of good that can come from that. There's just such this barrier between like that academic jargon, the hidden journals, and getting it into the right hands. So how do you break it down? How do you facilitate those conversations and communicate that? So I really liked most. But so future directions, this is great because actually as Dan came up and told me, and we were talking about how I used to give this similar talk to his undergrad students in his careers class. The pinnacle goal for me for the longest time has just to get to AAAS. And so I actually and I want to say blazed, but I blazed my own path, right? Because you don't hear about this. The only touch base I had with science policy was through Dr. Canali. And so she was kind of like, yeah, I support you in this endeavor, but I don't have all these resources that I can keep giving you, even though she actually gave me quite a bit of resources without, I don't know if she actually knew she did or not. But so I want to stay at the level of the federal government. I really like it. There's so many opportunities there, and it's very wide ranging. So I would like to stay there. I love DC, so I want to stay in DC for a little bit longer. I don't know if that's like where I'm gonna put down my roots or anything like that, but staying within the federal government, kind of staying within law enforcement too. Research, I didn't realize how much I actually enjoyed working with police officers and kind of understanding this health and wellness and these barriers to recruitment and retention because we have such a poor recruitment and retention plan moving forward. And unfortunately, we need police. Like we cannot have a life without police. We just need them to be better in some capacity, right? So it's been really cool being able to like assist with that. No, I am public trust. But that would be good to have. Yeah. Yeah.
How can scientists and academia engage in policy efforts?
Yeah, actually, I was just telling Jen about this. There's so within most policy initiative, they actually have money from AAAS to start the Missouri Local Science Engagement Network. And so if you have any interest in trying to figure out like science policy, if this is for me, is the science communication aspect for me, they actually allow like guest writers and expertise to kind of help with science notes and to put together some community engagement notes, which might be not something specifically related to the Missouri legislature, but it's a topic that of your interest. So there are ways where you can start to practice that and get involved. And as I believe, Brian, we were kind of talking about this too, you can get involved in science policy as a citizen. If you see something going on in your area and you're like, this doesn't make sense and what they're saying isn't adding up, you have every right to go down to your state legislature and go testify in a committee and say why or why not this bill should or not go through. So there are ways that you can definitely get involved in the policy side of things, and especially with your background and having a knowledge in science, you can definitely bridge that in for your own opportunity.
Awesome talk. Super. So, my question is: so, whenever somebody, I guess, comes to you regarding a certain policy, are you like advising them just solely based on science? So, like an example, you're talking about like those daycare. To say, just from a purely scientific standpoint, that's, but then I'm gonna have consequences.
We are only just looking at purely the science. So we provide them with the information, and what they do with that information is on them, if that makes sense. I'm not advising them to go one way or the other. I'm not trying to advocate for a certain side. I'm just trying to be like, here's this bed of knowledge for you to consider while you're making your decision. And the other thing that we do too is like, you try to present both sides of the argument, right? Because you don't want to come off as partisan. You want to be able to be like here's the one side of the argument, and here's the research that goes with the one side, but there is research that's going to show the other side. And so if you're only showcasing one side, that's biased. So make sure you're showcasing both sides, even if there's no like true information. That's a limitation, right? We don't know enough research to make an evidence-based guess as to how this would impact, and that's a limitation that you bring up and highlight. We didn't necessarily do bias training per se, but there are instances where you're like, this is touching a little bit of like a spot with me, and the biggest one that I can come up with, if you're looking for an example, would be women's healthcare issues, right? That one is kind of like, all right, let's try to say this in a calm manner. It was actually a special session in Missouri 2 years ago when they were talking. It was before the overturning of Roe v. Wade and everything like that, but they were having a special session on Plan B as being an abortion device. You know what I mean? And so someone asked us to compile a brief of just what are all the birth control options out there, right? Just what are they, ranging from abortion, Plan B, explaining like how it works. How does like the ring work? How does the IUD work? How does the pill work? And just being like, yeah, here's all the just an information, just so that they understood how it worked, because there was too many instances of people saying the wrong thing. They're not even being medically accurate. So it's hard, but there's ways where you can do it in a constructive way.
I know it's tough, but like, do you ever see,
That's a good question. I don't know if I actually have seen that. I know a couple of times some of the science notes that I wrote, they would be taken into news articles and they'd be like, hey, look, here's some of the background information. One of those was related to menstrual hygiene products in prisons because they're not free. So they're using their they're using their work wages that they get while they're in prison mostly to buy products, and then they can't really afford a phone call or anything on top of that. So that made it into a couple of news articles. Was that like the point of like that made the law go through? I don't know. I don't think so. They have so many people talking with them. So
How long does it take to write a science?
that depends how fast the turnaround is. The fastest we've done is 24 hours. It's a team, it becomes a team effort, right? If someone calls you up and they're like, hey, I've got a committee hearing in 24 hours and I need this note, I need this information, you're staying up all night. It is what it is. Sometimes you might have a week. Sometimes you can sit on them for like 2 months when it's like in the downtime of legislation, because Missouri is a part-time legislature, so they are only active between January through May. So as they're preparing for the next session, they may be like, hey, we have some ideas, but I don't need them until October. I don't want your information until October because I'm going on vacation, so just leave me alone. You're like, okay, fine, whatever. So some of them you can sit on if it's like a slower time period, but when it's like in the middle of session, yeah, it's usually like 3 days max. Get it out. Yeah. And so when we're writing those science notes too, like you do all the research, you put it together, we actually review all of our own, not our own work, but like I would review the other fellows' work, comb through it, make sure that it makes sense, that they're not being biased. Are they directly plagiarizing? Because that's not efficient or effective to communicate this information. So it was a big team collaborative effort. Like I was in charge of one specific portfolio, but I couldn't get through it without having the other fellows there to like comb through and be like, oh, actually you forgot this point. Like maybe you should tie that in or something like that. So because you get so focused in your niche, you know what I mean? So it's nice to have another set of eyes to help out with that.
So I'm curious if whenever you're writing your science notes, like I know you have to be nonpartisan with them, but you know, a lot of the time the policy comes down to the financial aspect of it, and you know what's going to save us the most money. But inevitably, whenever you're writing these notes, it's not, you know, you can't necessarily do that. Are you asked to try to like sway the connotation of the money in some ways, or is it purely like this is the number done?
We don't really mess around with the budgetary stuff. We stay away from that. We literally just focus on the factual information. Yeah, we don't really tie into the budget because again, that's not our job. Our job is just to be that Google, you know what I mean? Like we're not supposed to tie in like the numbers or anything like that. We can pull examples from other states and be like, this was the budget that they had to do this policy for this year, but we can't be like, it'll cost this much to do this.
Right.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking mostly from like the diabetes. There was one article about type 2 diabetes in 2017 that like this cost $327 million.
Oh yeah, we'll tie in like those. We always tie in like the statistics, like the numbers, you know what I mean? Like how many people are affected by this, or you know what does the estimated cost of this for the United States when it comes down to it? You know, stuff like that. We do pull in those that factual information, but we have to be careful what sources we're pulling that from. So like for example, I'm not going to pull abortion related information from Planned Parenthood or something like that. I have to try to find like an actual unbiased source that's going to break this down for me. Like I got to make sure that it's because if I pull something from like, I think it's like the Guttmeyer Institute, they're going to be like, you're advocating for this side of the argument, even though I just pulled their number. That's it. But they'll be like, you're attached to pro-choice and I don't want to talk to you anymore. So you have to be very careful about what your sources are.
About work, so it sounds like a very fast-paced job. What is your work-life balance?
So with most, it was a little like it was crazy. Let's just put it that way. But one thing I made sure to do was just carve out 1 hour for myself when I could. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but that hour would just be me going to the gym. And that's honestly what I did when I was in grad school too. I gave myself 1 hour to keep my sanity, and it was to go to the gym every day, 5:30 p.m. You could find me at CrossFit Fringe, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because I needed to take a break from life. So yeah, the work-life balance part of it can be tough. But as I was kind of explaining to like the grad students at lunch, I know when we talk about work-life balance, you're in grad school, you're working so much, right? But you have to keep something that's your identity that's not tied to your work. Because if things go wrong or if things fail or whatever the case may be, you don't need to like collapse over the fact that your project didn't take off. You have to have something that you can tie your identity to. But I know like in the moment, it sounds like you have no work-life balance or whatever. But when you go to your next position, you could see like you might have high times where you're going to be working way more than you ever thought you would. And you're like, where's my work-life balance? But then a couple months later, it slows down. And so you kind of get to average out that work-life balance. So sometimes it's a little crazy, but sometimes you're like, oh, I can leave like 2 hours early and like go to a happy hour or like go to the gym for an extra hour or whatever it is that you want to like do, but it balances out.
Some areas of government that make sense. This idea is how those areas that cross my mind. Are there other like surprising areas where someone like us can still
Because I had the same thought about National Institute of Justice when I saw that they wanted to interview me during like the fellowship.
Like, are they just coming off of like the science notes that I wrote that were related to criminal justice related stuff? Because I worked on some stuff with like gun storage laws and public safety funding and texting and driving, our reentry programs. Like, you do like so many different things. I was like, this is very confusing. In regards to like other surprise agencies,